this is not bigotry against Jewish people. And it's really dangerous that people like Jonathan Greenblatt are allowed to go on national television and repeat these like insidious and very dangerous claims that do put Jewish students in harm's way. If you are conflating the actions of an apartheid, genocidal, racist, ethno-nationalist state, conflating that with Jewish people, making them responsible, making all Jewish people responsible for Israel's crimes, I don't see anything that's more anti-Semitic than that. Like, it's completely insane, and it is dangerous, and it inspires hatred of Jews.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Kalik, and this is Dispatches. Israel's war on Palestine isn't limited to Gaza. It's global. In the US, it takes the form of censorship, bullying, intimidation, doxxing, accusations of antisemitism, attacking people's livelihoods, and increasingly using the arms of the state to potentially prosecute anyone who dares to stand up for the rights of Palestinians as they fight their extermination at the hands of the US-backed settler colony, Israel. But even in the face of all that, resistance is growing across the US and around the globe. Joining me to discuss this and more is Nora Barrows-Friedman, staff writer and associate editor at the Electronic Intifada. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Nora, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Rania. It's so good to be here.
It's so good to have you on. And I just want to say you all at EI, at Electronic Intifada, have been doing like God's work throughout this horrific period. I mean, Electronic Intifada is always amazing, but it's such a crucial source of information right now when all we're seeing in like the dominant narrative in the mainstream is lie after lie after lie. And we're actually going to get into some of that. Yeah. But, before we do, you are someone who's been covering this issue for decades. So I just am curious, like your general thoughts about, are you shocked by the sheer violence and horror of what we're seeing? I mean, basically, I want to hear how you're viewing the genocide in Gaza right now.
Yeah. On the one hand, it is the worst I've ever seen it. And I think most of us who have been doing this work for a long time are continuously and utterly shocked, absolutely, by just the depravity of the Israeli army and its government and its supporters, in Israel and here in the West, just how genocidal and out of their minds, like just like psychopaths, wanting every Palestinian dead and coming up with these justifications for wiping out entire apartment blocks and storming hospitals. And the level of propaganda, I keep like running out of words because I feel like we don't have the vocabulary to properly describe how horrifying this all is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm continuously shocked. I'm also not surprised because this is the essence of the Zionist project. This is what it's always been. This is what it's always planned. But I am just kind of appalled by how just relentless and psycho the Israeli government is acting and its military right now. So yeah, I'm just kind of like speechless most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking on a day when when this comes out, who knows what atrocity will be the atrocity of that day. In
Yeah.
fact, it seems like there's several. It's more like the atrocity of the hour.
Yeah.
I've never seen it this bad either. I think that's a really good point you made. But
Yeah.
I mean, today we're speaking as the Israelis just stormed Al-Shifa Hospital.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the hell is going on? How is this
Yeah.
allowed to happen? Like, you're right. We don't have the vocabulary. Sometimes you feel like the word genocide. I mean, it's a very powerful word, but is it
Yeah.
even, I don't know.
I know.
I don't know what the hell this is. I don't know what
I
you
know.
call it.
I know. I mean, I was listening to your interview just a few days ago with Craig Mokhiber, and the way that he described, the legal definition of genocide and the responsibilities by United Nations member states to intervene and prevent genocides like this from happening, and how, I mean, he resigned in disgust because of the lack of motivation from anybody inside the UN to actually step in and stop this massacre after massacre after massacre, just relentless, like just the slaughter that is just being supported and abetted and aided by the West is just, I mean, it should induce revulsion in anybody. But to see it happen on such a televised scale, and the Western leaders are just egging it on. I mean, I'm just like, where do we go from here? What happens next? What is this world? I'm losing a lot of hope in humanity, but then on the same, at the same time, I'm also really encouraged by people, by the resistance in Gaza, by people, putting themselves up for arrest, getting arrested here in the States, trying to shut this war machine down. And so it's like, yeah, on the one hand, I'm like, we can't come back from this. And on the other hand, I'm like, no, we absolutely can. A better world is possible. And we are the ones who can make it so. But it's just but then at the same time, you're just watching, the storming of Al-Shifa and these, tiny babies that had to be pulled out of their incubators because there's no electricity in Shifa. And the world is just watching this and letting it happen. I don't know. It's very bleak.
It is. Bleak is one way to put it. But one thing that I'm very happy that you guys at EI have been covering, and actually I do want to apologize for my voice.
No, don't.
I was recording. I've lost my voice a bit. But one thing that you guys have been covering at EI, and you specifically have been covering, is the way that there's obviously, what Israel's doing in Gaza, first and foremost, is the worst, what it's doing in the region, what it's doing to Palestinians, but it's also fighting this global war against any resistance anywhere to its horrific atrocities. And that includes in the US. And so that's something you've been covering. And I want to talk about a piece you recently wrote, specifically about Israel lobbying efforts in the US. This is the Electronic Intifada. I encourage people to go read this in its entirety. For those who are just listening, the headline is Israel lobby wants to brand anti-war students as terror supporters. And that's not hyperbole. It's really not. You actually write in this piece, fueled by demands from the Israel lobby groups, U.S. students who are organizing against Israel's genocidal attacks are facing accelerated repression by their own university administration. And basically, this is another aspect of the use of anti-Semitism to go after people who support Palestine, including Jews, of course. And then you write in the piece, that the Anti-Defamation League specifically and the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights under law, which are, do not be confused, these are two right-wing Israel lobby groups, as you say, masquerading as civil rights organization. They sent notices to hundreds of U.S. universities urging them to punish students who are protesting Israel's slaughter in Gaza and designate them as terror supporters.
Yeah.
This is insane. There's been talk of getting Congress to like investigate these students and perhaps prosecute them under the material support for terrorism clause. I will let you take it from there, Nora. Can you like break down what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this all over the US, but also in Canada and in Europe as well. But I focused on the US for this piece just because I didn't, I couldn't handle like a 10,000 word piece at this point. But it is happening everywhere. And this is a product of the last, really 40, almost 50 years of organizations like the ADL, the so-called Anti-Defamation League, which has tried and fairly succeeded at this point to conflate criticism of Israeli policy and the Israeli state ideology, Zionism, with anti-Jewish bigotry. Just one of the most pernicious and actually anti-Semitic efforts, to try and conflate people with a state genocidal ideology of Zionism. But they've been doing this, and the ADL has kind of ramped up its escalation, and escalated this in recent weeks to try and tie students, specifically Students for Justice in Palestine chapters and Jewish Voice for Peace chapters on campuses, to be surveilled, investigated, punished, even criminally prosecuted under, what you mentioned, the material support for terrorism law, which was, has been really abused, obviously, by Islamophobic forces in this country ever since 9/11 specifically, to try and criminalize support for Palestinian human rights. And so the ADL and the Louis Brandeis Center, which is a lawfare organization, as you know, the head of the Louis Brandeis Center is this creature named Kenneth Marcus, who really pioneered the practice of filing complaints to the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, alleging that the mere presence of organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace or Students for Justice in Palestine on campuses was tantamount to anti-Semitism and was harmful to quote unquote Jewish students on campus. And Kenneth Marcus worked with all sorts of Zionist organizations to file these complaints over the years. And then under the Trump administration, he was appointed to head the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education to basically adjudicate the kind of complaints that he had engineered. Total, like fox in the henhouse on steroids. He was eventually forced to resign. I believe it was in 2019, something like that, because it was revealed that he had prioritized complaints from the Zionist Organization of America against.
Shocking.
Shocking. And now he's back as the head of the Louis Brandeis Center, working with the ADL and the Zionist organizations to criminalize support for Palestinian rights on campus. So these very, well-funded, influential organizations masquerading as civil rights groups are now encouraging universities around the U.S. to adopt the principle of investigating their own students under this ridiculous material support for terrorism law, and they know that there's no evidence for these student groups who literally hold bake sales to raise funds for their chapters to hold speaking events and film screenings and stuff. That there's no evidence to tie them to any sort of quote unquote terrorism group. But the intention is to chill speech on campus and to try and get students to shut up about supporting Palestinian rights or to call for, the end of Israel's bombing of Gaza. And unfortunately, universities in this country are, they pay lip service to free speech and academic freedom. And that's about it. They are more than willing to throw their own students under the bus and really, become, listen to these organizations without any sort of like merit or evidence. And so we see like Brandeis University, for example, forcing SJP on campus to disband after SJP had organized a candlelight vigil for the victims of Israel's bombing in Gaza, and branded them as like.
I was going to say, what was the claim?
Yeah, the claim was that that the parent organization, National Students for Justice in Palestine, was supporting Hamas terrorism, right? Like this, like complete, which is insane. And like, I mean, just this like, the fact that and then also not just Brandeis, but Columbia University, a couple days after I published that article, Columbia University also disbanded their SJP chapter and their Jewish Voice for Peace chapter on campus in kind of a similar effort. And since, students are not, I mean, I am so impressed by the level of commitment to principled solidarity that students in these very elite institutions are showing with Palestinians and with their fellow students who are being thrown under the bus by these administrations. I mean, just a day or so ago, 40 student organizations at Columbia decided to form a coalition and support divestment from, Columbia of Israeli investments. Really like showing Columbia that they'll try to smear SJP and JVP, but that the principles of SJP and JVP aren't going anywhere, and that students are now activated and they're motivated to come together and fight these sorts of smear campaigns and repression by universities.
Yeah, and I just want to this was from a few weeks ago, but I just want to give an idea to people of just how, like, what students are up against. Because on top of course, like having a potential like federal investigation for material support for terrorism, that's like a huge threat to be made to students. There's also stuff like this, which is, I'm sure you remember this article in the Wall Street Journal, where you have I think this guy's a professor
at UC Berkeley Law.
Berkeley, So this is in the Wall Street Journal for those who can or just listening. The title was, this was back on October 15th, by the way. So this was like in the beginning of the genocide, which was several thousand less dead children. And the title of the article is "Don't Hire My Anti-Semitic Law Students." And then it's an entire article about how you shouldn't hire his anti-Semitic law students. But I also want to get your take on this, because here's Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of this fake civil rights organization that's actually an Israel lobbying group called the Anti-Defamation League, speaking on CNN about what he thinks should be done to activists who are supporting equality for Palestine. He's just going to call them Hamas supporters because that's what he calls everyone who supports Palestine. But let's listen to what he has to say.
We fight all forms of hate. But I think in this moment, we need to stop this constant sort of conflation of the two. The college campuses are on fire right now. The ADL's tracked 832 incidents across the country, almost 30 a day over the month after the Gaza.
Is the president's program enough to try to counteract that?
Look, the president has been strong and supportive, and we are so appreciative of that, but we need more. We need the Department of Education to take proactive action to get these universities to do something. There have been good signs, but we need more. I'll also tell you, we need the right governmental authorities like the IRS and the FBI to make sure that the national organizations aren't providing material support for Hamas. which is a foreign terror organization. That needs to happen right away.
Only today, and I don't know what.
So that is the head of the ADL calling for the IRS and the FBI, in addition to the Department of Education, to investigate students, to investigate activists who are literally just against segregation and genocide.
Yes. Yeah. And those, like, you know, I can't remember the ridiculous figure he gave, like 600 incidents of, you know, anti-Semitism. There is no anti-Semitism crisis on campus. This is something that the ADL has crowed about for years, trying to, again, smear supporters of equality and justice for Palestinians as anti-Jewish bigots, many of whom are Jewish students themselves. And so now he's like seizing this opportunity. And if you look at the actual like data that the ADL has put out there to, like, you know, buttress their claim of like 600% rise or whatever it is, like 6 billion% rise in anti-Semitism on campuses, most, if not all, of those incidents are peaceful demonstrations calling for a ceasefire, candlelight vigils for Israel's victims, and calls for justice for Palestinians. I mean, this is not bigotry against Jewish people. And it's really dangerous that people like Jonathan Greenblatt are allowed to go on national television and repeat these like insidious and very dangerous claims that do put Jewish students in harm's way. If you are conflating the actions of an apartheid, genocidal, racist, you know, ethno-nationalist state, you know, conflating that with Jewish people, making them responsible, making all Jewish people responsible for Israel's crimes, I don't see anything that's more anti-Semitic than that. Like, it's completely insane, and it is dangerous, and it inspires hatred of Jews if you want to say that all Jews are responsible for that. I mean, it's completely insane. And Jonathan Greenblatt is, I hope that at some point in the future, in a just world, when we are able to hold war criminals accountable for this crime, and the people who aid and abet it and incite violence against Palestinians, I hope that Jonathan Greenblatt is also on the dock at The Hague, having to answer for his war crimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, he just like perpetuates blood libels against Palestinians, and is in charge of an organization that is promoting their genocide. It's so insane. Yeah. I also want to just to show people just how like insidious and widespread these accusations are. This is just a clip of like a promotion by CNN for it already aired, but this is just before it aired, of a special they were doing on anti-Semitism in America. Here are two white blonde women on CNN denying that it's anything, you know, it's just complicated. But you know what's not complicated is the anti-Semitism on college campuses. Let's take a listen.
The society, the fabric, the culture, not just on college campuses, but also even more so on the progressive hard left, and maybe even not just the hard left. And the first time we did this, Kate, it was in 2022, the majority of the incidents were coming from white supremacists on the far right. And that's still there. But because it has been allowed to just kind of run rampant, growing in a growing way on the left, Kate, that is why it is exploding now with this incident, which is very complicated. This war is extremely complicated. What is not complicated is that there is a violent rage that is going on against Jews that we have not seen, maybe even ever, in America.
And that's important, because while the history in the region is complicated, And there are lots of people on every side who do not have clean hands. And politicians on all sides do not have clean hands. What there is clarity on, and what is clear, is that the Jew hate is so real. Hearing from Chris Wray that the group that is 2% of the American population is subject to something like 60% of religious-based hate, there is a problem here. It's like, it's been building and it just needed the fuse to be lit.
And that was before October 7th. That's what's important to keep in mind. I mean, we talked to group.
Okay, so I think that's enough.
My God.
But I just have a couple of things I want to say, and then I want to get your take on that. And that is, did you notice how it's like, I don't know if Jonathan Greenblatt was like, here, read this script, because they both said the same exact thing. Like, so you heard it twice as a viewer. It was like, the conflict is not clear. It's complicated. They both said that, followed by, but you know what's not complicated and what is clear is the Jew hate in America. I also thought it was incredibly offensive that Dana Bash spoke such a lie that it's never been this bad in America. Have you ever studied American history? Like, there actually used to be institutional anti-Semitism in America. And for her to say that is actually like denying that. It's like she's the one denying anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
It's so insane. Like, go ahead, just take it.
I'm just like, where do you even start with this? The fact that they're not talking about the actual right-wing white supremacist Nazi groups that are in this country, who have firebombed synagogues, who are like, they were wearing khakis and tiki torches and marching on, was that Charlottesville or whatever, wherever it was. That is not as dangerous and pernicious as like students on UC Berkeley or Columbia campus chanting like, "Please stop the genocide." I mean, just like, how does your and the fact that they trying to repeat this assertion that it's so complicated, that the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict is very complicated. It's very complex. Everybody has, dirty hands in this situation. But the real problem are the students who are trying to, open people's eyes to the apartheid and genocide of Palestinians. I mean, these people, I don't even know where to begin. Yeah, I mean, of course they get their talking points from the ADL. They get their talking points from their bosses. They get their talking points from the pundits, their colleagues at CNN who are, former war generals and, are on the boards of like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. It is just, I mean, I'm so glad that I can't watch mainstream corporate media. I literally there's like a fatwa in my house against me watching like corporate news, because I just I'll break something. I get so incensed and full of rage because these people, these puppets for American empire and for Israeli colonialism are just allowed to spew whatever racist, ridiculous garbage that puts people in harm's way. I mean, they're talking about investigating 19-year-old college students while there are literal white supremacists running around this country who are far more dangerous and armed, who have real intentions of harming people. I don't know. It makes me insane. It makes me crazy.
Yeah, totally. And there's also if you're really going to sit there and talk about being against bigotry, I didn't hear them mention the issue of Islamophobia or
No, never. That's just okay.
Yeah.
Because Arabs deserve it. Because again, the way that Islamophobia has been unchallenged and just allowed to proliferate and has been mainstreamed, especially over the last 25 years in this country, makes it possible for the ADL and Dana Bash and all these horrible people to just paint all Arabs, all Palestinians, and supporters of freedom, equality, and justice and anti-genocide politics as terrorists or terror supporters or racists or anti-Jewish bigots. I mean, it's complete insanity.
It is complete insanity. And, one of the reasons I think that they're going so hard on this is because they have to. Because, yeah, I'm like you. I don't watch mainstream media. I just see clips that people put on like Twitter and Instagram. And that's how I know what CNN is saying.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, like if I really feel like some self-hate, I'll like, I'll be like, okay, let me, I also wanted to talk about this, but I'm actually getting to this piece that you wrote as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I want to like really hate on myself, I will turn to CNN just for a moment, but I can't stomach it.
Yeah.
It's too horrible.
Yeah.
But what I want to say here is that I think there's a desperation in the kind of propaganda you're seeing because there's such a tsunami of support for Palestine.
Yeah.
It's these like massive mobilizations that we're seeing across the world, really. But in the US, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people coming out in the streets in cities across the country. That is huge.
Yeah.
And that it's like in an unprecedented fashion, the majority of the country, despite all of this insane propaganda, actually wants to see a ceasefire. That says so much. I mean, people I think are getting their news, a lot of them online. But it's also just hard to deny that this is such a horrific situation, even if you think it's complicated. Most people see images of dead children, and if they're not racist psychopaths, they're like, oh, that's really sad. I want the children to stop being bombed. Like, that's a basic human instinct. So that's a good segue into another piece that you wrote, which is about some of the really important activism and disruptions across the country, particularly when it comes to blocking putting weapons shipments onto ships that are destined for Israel to be used against Palestinians. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I think it's so important to highlight what people are doing to put a stop to this, because it's quite inspiring and also really important.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, this is one of the stories that kind of like refreshes my hope in humanity and the hope of people, literally putting their bodies on, what Mario Savio said, like putting your body on the gear to stop this machine. And so, yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it feels like a year ago already, but this was a couple of weeks ago here in Oakland, and then up further north on the West Coast in Tacoma, Washington, where activists were able to really disrupt, business as usual at these ports, scaling the actual like entrance of the ship to stop it from leaving port and, collecting. I guess it was going to be loaded in Tacoma with supposedly weapon shipments that was ultimately destined for Israel. And so activists here in the Bay Area gathered at the port of Oakland and held this incredible action. I think they delayed the ship for like 9 hours, which is a lot of money. Ships it costs a lot of money when a ship is delayed. And so they incurred a material consequence on this ship. And then it went to Tacoma, and it was met by hundreds and hundreds of activists there, including a bunch of indigenous activists who used their canoes to kind of disrupt the ship and prevent it from leaving port. And it really highlights, this wide umbrella of local activists who are fed up with, business as usual, the Western war machine just kind of like, clocking ahead and doing what it does. And, it's just a normal thing for the U.S. to send a cargo ship, or I think there was something like, a few dozen cargo ships over the last month that have been unloading weapons to the Israeli military to be dropped on children's heads in Gaza. And this is also, it doesn't have, it doesn't come without precedent either. I mean, in God, I can't even remember now. Many years ago, activists in the Bay Area also disrupted an Israeli shipping line here at the port of Oakland, and they were able to successfully prevent the Israeli cargo company Zim from ever docking at Oakland again. And they were working, it wasn't just the activists who were doing this, they were organizing with the International Longshore Workers Union, which has a long and colorful history of doing incredible direct action as workers, as unionized workers, whether it was against the apartheid government in South Africa. They refused to unload or load ships during that time. They did the same during the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. And then they were, again, taking up the same cause against Israeli military weapons shipments. And so, it really kind of highlights and underlines this massive movement right now. I mean, it's been 20 years since the U.S. occupation of Iraq began. And I remember being in the streets in 2003 with millions of people from all over, one action of many all around the world that were trying to stop this war from happening. And really to see people activated again. And I think in even more of an organized way, taking these kinds of actions and not letting up and not giving up. And, just here in the Bay Area, I mean, there were like 700 members of Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jewish organizations who locked themselves down at the Oakland Federal Building a few nights ago. And something like 450 people got arrested. And it's just this, and it's not like a one and done sort of thing. Like they are, constantly organizing these kinds of actions and protests. And it's not just here in the Bay Area, it's all over the world and this country. And, people just rising up and trying to rattle the cage, of these warmongers, of these genocidaires who are just trying their best not to listen, not to pick up the phones, and hear what people are saying. So, I mean, it's inspiring and it is necessary.
Well, I think that's it's so important for people to remember that in such a dark moment, is that the majority of the world agrees with us, actually.
Yeah.
The people who don't, unfortunately, are the ones in power in some of the most powerful countries in the world. And that's why this is happening, right? It's because mostly of the U.S. Like the U.S. could stop this tomorrow, and the Biden administration is choosing not to. Right. And, I've seen Gaza be described as from the military terms, because, if you follow people who follow military stuff, they're like, okay, the atrocities are horrible, but actually Israel is militarily not advancing. And this is going to be the graveyard of the Israeli state and the Israeli military. Well, if that's true, I also think that Gaza is going to be the graveyard of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Because there's been a fight brewing inside the Democratic Party's base for years. And EI has been covering that issue a lot. And there was this rally that a lot of Democrats spoke at. We're recording the day after that rally. It was yesterday. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. It was basically like this pro-genocide march.
A rally for genocide. Yeah.
It was such a disgusting rally, not only because a bunch of psychotic, actually anti-Semitic right-wingers spoke there, like John Hagee, but you had people like Van Jones speak at this rally. I just want to show this clip because I think it's so telling of what, if you go to any pro-Palestine march, it's calling for equality, justice, peace, rights for Palestinians, rights for everyone, from the river to the sea is not a genocidal chant. It's actually a chant for equality from the river to the sea. But here is Van Jones speaking at this rally. Let's take a listen.
I'm a peace guy. I pray for peace. No more rockets from Gaza and no more bombs falling down on the people of Gaza. God protect the children. God protect children. Let's end all the horror and all the heartbreak in the Holy Land. Let's end all of it. Let's end all of it. But I'll be honest in closing. When I think about what's happening over there, I don't feel
here it goes.
Powerful to do something about what's happening over there. What I do feel powerful is to maybe do something about what's happening here. Let's take a stand here against anti-Jewish bigotry. Let's take a stand against Muslim. Let's take a stand here against hatred. Let's take a stand here against hatred of all kinds. I don't want.
So this is a crowd, right? He called for like no more bombs dropping on anyone. And the crowd bursted out into a chant, for those who couldn't make it out, of no ceasefire. They were literally chanting at Van Jones for saying the most uncontroversial thing imaginable. No ceasefire, no ceasefire,
Amazing.
no ceasefire. And it's just amazing to me that Democrats are willing to align themselves with such hatred. Actually, it shouldn't be amazing to me though. But I'm just curious, like your general take on the fact that it seems to me at this point that the pro-Israel movement in the West, in the US, is actually like a pro-hate movement.
Yes.
I don't think that's exaggerating to say.
No, I don't think it is at all. I mean, Van Jones is a disgrace, and I hope this is the final, nail in the coffin for his aspirational career.
Whatever.
I mean, that's it. No more.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.